In the small village of Domrémy, nestled in the northeastern region of France, a young girl named Joan was born around the year 1412. And this period coincided with the ongoing Hundred Years' War, a protracted conflict between England and France that had been raging for nearly a century. Joan's family were peasants, and she grew up in a humble environment, learning domestic skills from her mother and developing a deep devotion to the Catholic Church. Unlike many of her peers, Joan never learned to read or write, but she possessed a sharp mind and a strong sense of faith. At this time, France was in a state of turmoil, and the English, in alliance with the Burgundians, controlled a significant portion of French territory. The French king, Charles VI, was seen as a weak ruler, and his son, Charles VII, was struggling to gain recognition as the rightful heir to the throne. The common people suffered greatly from the war, and a sense of despair pervaded the land. It was amidst this backdrop of conflict and uncertainty that Joan's story began to unfold. When Joan was about 13 years old, she experienced a series of visions and heard voices that she believed were sent by God, and these divine messages instructed her to seek out the uncrowned King Charles VII and help him reclaim his kingdom from the English. Initially, Joan kept these experiences to herself, but as the visions persisted, she became convinced of their authenticity and her divine mission. In 1428, at the age of 16, Joan decided to take action, and she approached the local garrison commander, Robert de Baudricourt, requesting an escort to the court of Charles VII. And Baudricourt initially dismissed her request, but Joan's persistence and conviction eventually persuaded him to grant her an audience. In February 1429, Joan embarked on a perilous journey across enemy territory, disguised as a male soldier, to reach Charles VII, who was residing in Chinon, and upon arriving at the court, Joan immediately impressed Charles and his advisors with her sincerity and unwavering faith. She recounted details of her visions and spoke with such conviction that Charles began to believe in her divine mission. To further test, Charles hid himself among his courtiers, but Joan immediately identified him, further solidifying her credibility. Charles agreed to provide Joan with troops and armor, and she quickly gained the trust and admiration of the soldiers, and her presence on the battlefield boosted the morale of the French army, which had been suffering a series of defeats. Joan's first major military engagement was the Siege of Orléans, a strategically important city that was under English control. In May 1429, Joan led the French forces in a series of assaults against the English fortifications, and her courage and determination inspired the soldiers, and they were able to break the city and liberate the city, and this victory marked a turning point in the Hundred Years' War. Following the victory at Orléans, Joan urged Charles VII to travel to Reims, the traditional coronation city of French kings, and in July 1429, Charles was crowned King of France in a grand ceremony at Reims Cathedral, and Joan stood by his side, holding the French banner. And this event was a significant moment in French history, as it legitimized Charles's claim to the throne and boosted national morale. Joan continued to lead the French army in a series of successful campaigns, liberating several towns and cities from English control, and her military successes and her unwavering faith made her a popular figure among the French people, who saw her as a divinely sent savior. However, Joan's military career was short-lived. In May 1430, during the siege of Compiègne, Joan was captured by Burgundian troops, who were allied with the English, and the Burgundians sold her to the English, who put her on trial for heresy and witchcraft. The trial was politically motivated, and the English sought to discredit Joan and Charles VII by portraying her as a heretic. The trial was conducted by a pro-English clergy, and Joan was interrogated relentlessly, but she remained steadfast in her faith and maintained that her visions were of divine origin. In May 1431, Joan was convicted of heresy and sentenced to be burned at the stake, and on May 30, 1431, at the age of 19, Joan was executed in the marketplace of Rouen. And her execution was witnessed by a large crowd, and her courage and faith in the face of death further solidified her image as a martyr. Years later, in 1456, a retrial was conducted, and Joan was officially exonerated of all charges. In 1920, she was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church, and Joan of Arc's story has continued to inspire people for centuries, and she is remembered as a symbol of courage, faith, and patriotism. Her role in the Hundred Years' War was crucial in turning the tide of the conflict in favor of France. Her story has been the subject of numerous books, plays, and films, and she remains one of the most popular and iconic figures in French history.